Okay, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody is having a wonderful week. I am still here, so I'm happy to see you, but I apologize that means that unfortunately my father has not yet been able to return. It looks like this week and next week I will be giving the shiur, and then hopefully my father should be returning 2 weeks from now. Be'ezrat Hashem. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to learn together today with you, and next week Be'ezrat and Be'ezrat Hashem, and then hopefully after that my father will resume his weekly classes. Okay, so what I want to do today is, as those of you who have been with us the last few weeks know, although my father's class had been a study on Sefer Bereshis, we've been studying together Parshat HaShavua, learning things connected to the Parshat HaShavua, and generally we have been doing things connected to the upcoming Parsha. I would like to break from that today and talk a little bit about this past week's Parsha. Last week was election day, so we didn't have the opportunity to learn together. And there is a topic that I'd like to explore with you today that I think also you'll see at the end very much connects to some of the experiences that we're going through as a nation that I think is important for us to think about. And therefore I wanted to kind of really focus. It's still Tuesday, so usually on Tuesday is still considered, at least in some areas of halacha, considered to be connected to this past Shabbat. So we'll be talking a little bit about this past week's Shabbat, the Parsha of Tisa, and one of the most probably dramatic events, and probably also one of the most enigmatic events of the Parsha or of the Torah, which is the breaking of the LUCHOT. Moshe's smashing of the Shtei Luchot Habrit. And I'd like to just take a step back, read a little bit about, as we always do, read the text itself, try to understand what's going on, and also try to understand why Moshe did this, how Moshe could do this, and hopefully gain through that a more meaningful understanding of what happened. We'll begin at source number one. Source number one, just to set the stage, I didn't bring all the psukim, but to understand what's happening, HaKadosh Baruch OUisrael have begun to have built the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf, and they've begun to serve the idol. There's different interpretations as to exactly the nature of the sin of the golden calf. We're not going to get into that this week, but the simple understanding seems to be that they are serving serving it as an idol in some way. HaKadosh Baruch Hu turns to Moshe. Hashem and Moshe are at the height of Har Sinai. Hashem turns to Moshe and says, Moshe, your nation is sinning. You need to go down and you need to confront them. Moshe then davens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu then even says that he might destroy the Jewish people. Moshe davens on their behalf, convinces HaKadosh Baruch Hu not to destroy the Jewish people. And Moshe then goes down with the Luchot to see what's going on. And that's where we find ourselves in source number one. Vayifen vayered Moshe min hahar. And Moshe turns and goes down from the mountain. Ushnei luchot ha'idut biyado, and the two luchot of testimony, the two tablets of testimony are in his hands. Luchot kituvim mishnei evrehem. They are luchot that are written from both sides. Mizeh umizeh hein kituvim. They're written on both sides. V'haluchot ma'aseh Elohim hema. V'hamichtav michtav Elohim hu charut al haluchot. And these luchot are the handiwork of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'hamichtav michtav Elokim, and the writing is written by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, engraved on the Luchot. And we're going to see, by the way, some of our Shim try to ask a basic question, which is, why is this relevant right now? Why is this description of the Luchot in terms of how they are written? In fact, some of the Mefarshim point out it should have actually been mentioned a few psukim or a parak earlier when the Torah was describing HaKadosh Baruch Hu engraving the Luchot. Why here, as Moshe is now carrying it down, does the Torah go into specific detail regarding the nature of the Luchot? And they try to, and the Mefarshim try to understand something significant from that. So keep that in the back of your minds. Moshe comes down the mountain. Vayishma Yehoshua et kol ha'am b're'o. Vayomer el Moshe kol milchama b'machaneh. Yoshua hears something happening, and he says to Moshe, "There's a fight. There's a milchama. There's a war." Vayomer ein kol anot gevura, ein kol anot chalusha, kol anot anochi shomea. There's different interpretations as to how to really understand Moshe's response. But Moshe's response basically seems to be, Yoshua, it's not what you think. This isn't a war. It's not strength. It's not this. There's something going on, and we need to go figure out what it is. Vayehi ka'asher karav el ha'machaneh. As they get closer to the camp, vayar et ha'egel, and Moshe sees the egel, umicholot, and he sees the celebration that is accompanying the Egel. Vayichar af Moshe. Moshe gets upset. Vayashlech miyadav et haluchot Vayishaber otam tachat ahar. And he throws from his hands these luchot, and they break at the bottom of the mountain. Now, the word vayashlech is a little bit of a funny word. Okay, and in modern Hebrew we would say vayizrok. Okay, vayashlech does mean refer to some kind of throwing, but a question that's unclear, at least from the text over here, is whether Moshe did this deliberately. Did it just kind of fall because like it was heavy? Okay, so there's a little bit of a vague description, at least in the Torah at this point in time. Moshe somehow, for some reason, gets rid of these luchot and they fall and they break. But exactly what causes that and how deliberate it is not yet clear from the text. Vayikach et ha'egel asher asu. Then Moshe then takes the egel which had been made. Vayisrof ba'esh, he burns it in the fire. Vayitchan ad asher dak. And then he crushes it until it's totally fine. Vayizer al pnei hamayim, vayash et pnei Yisrael. He puts it into the water and he gives them to drink. And again, Moshe then continues to deal with the aftermath of the Chet HaEgel. So at first glance, the Torah is a bit vague regarding why Moshe. The Torah says he saw what happened and he got upset. He got angry. But why exactly is Moshe breaking the luchot? Meaning, what happened? Why, if anything, again, remembering what the luchot are. Remember that the luchot are Ma'aseh Hashem. This is the holiest thing that has been created. This is the first thing that has been given, that has been written by God and given to man. Why is Moshe breaking the tablets? And I would take it even further. What gives him the right to break the tablets? What gives him the right to do that? Why is he allowed to do so? So, taking it even a step further, in Sefer Devarim, when Moshe recounts this event to OUisrael, the description is a little bit different. And we're going to look at source number 2. We'll take a step back. When Moshe recounts the events of the Chet HaEgel and God's response to Moshe, Moshe recounts the following scenario. Uvichorev, source number 2. Uvichorev hiktsatem et Hashem, vayitanaf Hashem bachem, lashmir eschem. And in Chorev, Har Chorev, which is Har Sinai, you angered HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he got upset at you, and he wanted to destroy you. Ba'aloti hahara lakachat luchot ha'avanim, luchot habrit, asher karat Hashem imachem. When I went up to the mountain to receive the 2 tablets of stone, these tablets that are symbolic of the Brit, of the covenant that Hashem had cut with you, had created with you. Vayishev bahar arba'im yom v'arba'im laila, lechem lo achalti yomayim lo shatiti. I sat there for 40 days. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. Vayitein Hashem elai et shnei luchot ha'avanim kituvim be'etzbe Elohim. Hashem gave me these luchot written with the hand of God. Va'alehem kichol hadvarim asher diber Hashem imachem bahar mitoch ha'esh b'yom ha'kal. And upon these luchot are all the things that Hashem had told you on the mountain. Vayihi miketz arba'im yom v'arba'im laila. Natan Hashem elai et shnei luchot ha'avanim luchot habrit. And then, over the course of those, at the end of those 40 days and 40 nights, Hashem gives me these 2 luchot, the luchot habrit. Vayomer Hashem elai kum raid maher. You should go down quickly. Ki shichet amcha asher hotzeta mi Mitzrayim. Because the nation that you have led out of Mitzrayim has been destructive, has destroyed themselves almost. Saru maher min haderech asher tzivitim asu lahem masecha. They have turned away from the path, and they have created for themselves a masecha. Now again, the word masecha here, we know masecha means a mask. Here, it seems to be some kind of molten image. The implication seems to be avodah zarah. That's the simplest understanding, which we'll go with for now. Hashem is basically saying to Moshe, they've done bad. Look at what they've done. You left them, and look at what happened. Vayom Hashem elai lemor ra'iti et ha'am hazeh v'nei am k'shehorafu. I've seen that. Hashem says to Moshe, I've seen the nation. They are a stubborn nation. Heref mimeni v'ashmideim. Leave me alone, and I will destroy them. Ve'emche et shema mitachat hashemayim ve'eseh oscha legoy gadol legoy atzum v'rab. Hashem says to Moshe, leave me alone. I want to destroy them, and I want to create another great nation from you. Va'efen ve'ered min ahar. Then Moshe describes what happens. He says, I turned and I came down from the mountain. Ve'hahar bo'er ba'esh, and the mountain is still full of flame. V'lushnei luchot habrit al yedei al shtei yadai, and I'm holding these 2 luchot habrit. Va'ere v'hinei chatatem la'Hashem Elokeichem. I look at what happened, and I see that in fact you have sinned to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Asitem lachem egel masecha. You have made an egel, a molten egel. Sartem ma'aher min haderech asher tziva Hashem. You have in fact turned away from the derech that Hashem had prepared or had commanded you. Va'et pos b'shnei luchot, and I grab these 2 luchot. Va'ashlichem me al shtei yadai, and I throw them from within my 2 hands. Va'ashabreim le'enechem, and I break them in front of you. So what's different here? What's different than the description? Here it seems very clear that it was very, very deliberate. Okay, very deliberate. I grab them, I pick them up with my hands, and I throw them down. Okay, which only I think really raises the question, which is, again, what gives Moshe the right to do that? What gives Moshe the right to be able to take these things that were written by HaKadosh Baruch Hu and just break them, even if he thought it was appropriate? Okay, compounding upon the issue is a well-known Gemara that Rashi himself quotes, that we'll see right now, based on source number 3. Source number 3 is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands Moshe to create the second luchot. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe pisa lecha shnei luchot avanim karishonim. Hashem says to Moshe, I want you to carve out 2 new luchot like the first ones. V'katavti al luchot et hadvarim asher ayu al luchot arishonim asher shibarta. And I will write on these new luchot that you're going to carve out what was written on the first ones that you broke. Okay. Now, why does it say again at the end of the pasuk asher shibarta? We all know that it had been broken. So there's a well-known Gemara. Rashi quotes the Gemara. The Gemara is in Masechet Yevamot, source number 4. The Tanya, we learned in a Braita. Shlosha devarim asa Moshe midato. There are 3 things that Moshe, on his own volition, did. V'hiskima dato l'data makom. And in the end, HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreed. Or HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreed with what he had done. Number 1, Piresh min ha'isha, he separated from his wife because of the fact, as Chazal say, that he didn't know when HaKadosh Baruch Hu would appear to him because of his special relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Number 2, Shiber et haluchot, he broke the luchot. Number 3, Hosif Yom Echad, that when it comes to the preparation for Matan Torah, he added 1 extra day in preparation to OUIsrael to prepare for the receiving of the Torah. We're not going to focus on the other 2, but the Gemara here talks about the breaking of the luchot. Continues the Gemara, V'hiskima da'ato l'data makom. Dichtiv asher shibarta. The pasuk says asher shibarta, that you broke. V'amar Reish Lakish, amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe, yasher kochacha sheshibarta. Yasher koach sheshibarta. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, so not only was he justified, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu praises him for it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, yasher koach. This is what you were supposed to do. You did the correct thing. It was done on his own volition. God didn't tell him to do it. But yet, after the fact, Hashem says, Yasher koach for breaking the luchot. Now, not only is this, a very, very important point, but this medrash, this idea that Moshe did the correct thing is the one medrash that Rashi brings and quotes at the very, very end, his last perush, at the very, very end of the Torah. The last commentary, the thing that Rashi ends with, is this specific point. The Torah at the very, very end of Sefer Devarim is describing the Nevuah of Moshe, and the Torah says that Moshe lo kam b'Yisrael k'Moshe, that there was no other Navi like Moshe Rabbeinu that spoke to Hashem panim el panim, and the Torah describes the last few psukim talk about the different things that Moshe had done on behalf of Yisrael or on behalf of Hashem for Yisrael, the different nisim, and the Torah ends with the words le'enei kol Yisrael, all the beautiful things that Hashem had done in front of the eyes of Yisrael. Look at source number 5. It says Rashi, what does it mean? All the different miracles and all the incredible things that he had done le'enei kol Yisrael. Says Rashi, shenisa'o libo lishbor taluchot le'eneihem. He made sure to break the luchot in front of them. There was something deliberate about breaking them in front of them. Shene'emar, as it says, va'ashabreim le'enechem. In Sefer Devarim, Moshe doesn't just say I broke them, he says I broke them in front of you. There was something that Moshe was doing here. V'hiskima dat HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'dato, and Hashem agreed with it. Shene'emar asher shibarta, that you broke, yasher kochacha sheshibarta. Okay, so again, what we've seen so far is just to set the tone. In the beginning in Parshat Shmos, it's a little bit unclear exactly why Moshe broke the luchot. It's even vague as to whether it was deliberate. In Sefer Devarim, it appears to be very deliberate. Moshe seems to clearly be saying that he deliberately broke the luchot. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he did it on purpose. Although we don't yet have a hint as to why. We don't know what the basis was. We even have indication that HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreed to it, based on this Medrash Yasher Koach Sheshibarta, which Rashi thinks is so important that he brings it as the pinnacle, the end of the Torah, at the end of his parish on the Torah. So the questions are still there. Number 1, why did he do it? Number 2, it seems like, according to the Midrashic interpretation, that Hashem agreed. But again, what gives Moshe the right to do this? What gives Moshe the right to take something which is so inherently holy, written by God, and to break it? Yes, comment or a question? Yes.
Listening to it, doesn't it sound like this has nothing to do with what actually happened?
Okay, so I would shift a little bit the way you're describing it. I agree with point number one. Point number one, they were struggling with this. Okay, I think all of the Mefarshim are going to struggle with this question. Question number one: how can Moshe do this? Okay, how can Moshe do this? And by the way, we're going to see some interpretations. Some Mefarshim dafka don't follow the midrashic interpretation that we've seen, perhaps because they just couldn't get themselves to believe that Moshe would purposely break the luchot. Number one. As to therefore say that they made it up, I don't know. Again, whenever we're dealing with midrashim, we know that some midrashim are true, some midrashim are just meant to teach us lessons, and there are different midrashic interpretations as to what Moshe was doing here. And I think we have the ability to see each of them, not necessarily determine what's correct and what's not correct, but to try to learn lessons from each of them and see the beauty in them. So I think you're right. I think you're right in the sense that this was a challenge. This was something that everyone was struggling with. And then the different interpretations that are developed are meant to teach us different lessons about what we can learn from this, even though we may not really know exactly what happened. Yes?
There's a little bit of a hint, though. Hashem says, go down, see what they're doing. He was pushing him into the situation. Doesn't mean he's breaking the rules.
He was pushing them in the situation, but of course he was. Now, again, I also laugh whenever I see the line where Hashem says to Moshe, go down to the nation that you took out of Mitzrayim. Look what they did. I think of the parent that says to the one spouse says to the other, look what your son did. Right? Okay. It's almost as if like what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you didn't take them out of Mitzrayim, but agree. It's almost as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, you're standing up here on the mountain. Look what's going on down there, and that's clear. Moshe needs to deal with it. How he deals with it, though, is not necessarily so clear. Yes.
I think that he broke the LUCHOT so that Hashem would not destroy the people, parallel to Hashem destroying the Beis Hamikdash, so he would
Yafeh. We're going to see that that's actually a beautiful interpretation that's given by the Medrash. He uses a different parable, a different mashal, but the idea that he was doing it actively to help the Jewish people, to save the Jewish people, is one of the interpretations that is given in the Midrash. Beautiful. So we're going to hold that off for a second. Okay? Before we start to see different interpretations, I want to also add one other question that I want us to be thinking about. We're only going to get to this at the end of the shiur, but I want us to be thinking about it in the back of our minds. What ultimately happens to these broken luchot? Anyone know?
Yeah.
Where are they put? They're put together with the new luchot in the Aron, in the Kodesh HaKodashim. Now, if I had been the one to commit this kind of a sin, okay, some horrific sin, and as a result, something very valuable got broken, that reminds me of this sin, what would I want to do with those objects? I'd throw them away. I'd hide them. I'd stick them under the bed. I wouldn't put them next to the second luchot in the Aron Kodesh, in the holiest place in Mishkan. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, okay, once we understand what happened here, why does the Kadosh Baruch Hu not only command Bnei Yisrael not to hide it or throw out the broken luchot, but to almost treasure them, to put them in the holiest place, to remind them? Good. So let's hold that. We're going to get to that at the end.
Hashem made them.
Hashem made them. Moshe broke them. Moshe broke them. But if anybody, Hashem's going to make new ones. Why do I need help? So again, good.
Is Moshe going to do the lettering?
On the new ones. There's new ones. Correct.
So they are eternal.
There again, you're right, but that only raises the question of what gave Moshe the right to do. Meaning, as you talk about how powerful they are, you're right. And again, I want us to just think about that, and I think we're going to get back to that. And some of the things that you guys I see some people mentioning, I think are true, but I think they'll become even more valuable once we really answer the first two questions and understand why perhaps Moshe did what he did, and then perhaps we can understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted him to keep those luchot. Yes?
Well, what's behind your question when you say, what gave Moshe the right to take the luchot? What is your thinking?
So my understanding is similar to what some of the people were suggesting here, which is that if something was given by God, written by God, carved out by God, I would think that Moshe would have to keep that hold on to that with the utmost care. Well, and for him to make a decision to say something so godly and to break it seems, at least to my mind, something that's pretty dramatic and would need justification.
Everything is made by God. Wow.
Okay. And you're pointing towards.
What I'm saying is that, just the same. What separates the luchos made by God from another piece of stone made by
You're raising a
God.
very good point. You're raising a very good point, and in fact, that's going to be one of the interpretations that we're going to see, which is that according to the Meshech Chochmah, that was the lesson that Moshe wanted to teach the Jewish people. We'll get to it. Thank you. Yes, a couple more, and then we're going to move on. Yes.
You may get to this later. I have not looked ahead at all, but as great as Moshe was, we know Moshe was a human being, and we know that Moshe had a temper. So it may,
Also,
you know,
good point.
He lost
Good
his
point.
temper.
Okay, it could be, and we're going to see that some people say that that's what happened. There are some interpretations that say that you're right. And we're going to see it. The Ramban actually suggests that Moshe he couldn't contain himself. Yes.
I'm going to actually take the opposite course.
Mhm.
Not that he did it out of temper, but actually that he did it in a calculated way because he wanted to eliminate the essence of why this was wrong to protect the Bnei Israel from being punished.
Excellent. Good. Okay. So both of these ideas are similar, and it's also similar to what you were suggesting. Very, very good. We're going to see a lot of these interpretations are hinted to or discussed in some of the midrashim that we're going to see today. Let's delve in and see the different range. In fact, this question of how could Moshe do it or why did Moshe do it, is so bothered or was such a challenge that there is a huge range of interpretations amongst the Mefarshim to answer this question. Okay? The first ones I want to discuss are those who actually don't follow the classic midrashic approach. Don't suggest that Moshe did it deliberately, but rather they suggest that it was almost something that Moshe Moshe couldn't help himself for one of two reasons. Look at the Rashbam, source number 6. So source number 6, the Rashbam says the following: Vayashlech miyadav kishera'a et ha'egel. When Moshe saw the egel, tashash kocho. He got weaker. He almost as if like from an emotional perspective, he got so upset and he got weak. Velo hayalu koach lahashlichem rachok mimenu ktsat shelo yazik et raglav binaflam. And so therefore, what he did was it was almost as if like he was carrying that down, full of energy. All of a sudden he sees what's happening, and all of a sudden he lost everything he had, and the luchot became much heavier than they were before. And they were about to drop, and he just barely, describes this photo, was able to throw them a little bit to avoid them falling on his feet. It was almost as if Moshe got there. He was so bothered by what he saw that he just emotionally lost all energy, and the luchot were about to fall. So what's the throwing that's described? The throwing that's describing is almost she was able to just exert a little bit of energy to throw them away so that they wouldn't land. As the Rashbam says, Shelo yazik et raglav. Kederech kol mashlichei masa'oi kishe'ein bahem koach laseit. He says it's like when somebody's carrying something extremely heavy and they don't have, sometimes when you're carrying something on your shoulder, you need more energy to pick it up and put it all, but sometimes what you just do is you just kind of like throw it off. So Moshe, all of a sudden, it got much heavier than it was, and just kind of threw it a little bit away so that it wouldn't land on his feet, and that's what it is. So according to this interpretation, and it's interesting, the Rashbam is specifically not taking the interpretation that he did deliberately. But says the Rashbam, Chen ra'iti biprakim shel Eliezer v'ikar pshutokach. I did see this in a different medrash. Not the classic medrash we saw before that said that he did it deliberately. There is a medrash that gives this description. What is the medrash that describes this event in the way that the Rashbam describes it? This is a Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Some of us may have heard this idea before. Source number 7. V'lakach misham et haluchot. That's a quote from the Torah. V'haya yored. Moshe was going down. V'hayu haluchot sovlim et atzmam. V'et Moshe atzmo imam. Says the medrash, these luchot, these tablets, were supernatural. Supernatural to the effect that the words on the tablets were carrying the tablet, and they were even carrying Moshe. So it wasn't heavy because Moshe was just like almost floating on air. That's the way I envision it. The tablets were carrying Moshe. The koach, the spirituality that was in these tablets, carried the tablets themselves and carried Moshe. Ukishera'u ha'egel. What happens when they face the sin of the egel? V'et ha'micholot, and not just the egel, but the celebrations. Baruchu haktuvim me'al haluchot. This is a relatively famous idea. The words that were on the tablets magically flew off. And once they flew off, what was carrying these tablets and Moshe is no longer there. All of a sudden, whoa, It got very, very heavy. Nimtzu kvedim al yado Moshe, v'lo haya Moshe yachol lisbol et atzmo, v'lo et haluchot, v'hishlichan miyado. So once the words flew off of the tablets, now Moshe's he's back in real life. He has these very heavy tablets that he can't even hold, and he just has to drop them because they're too heavy. He no longer is able to carry them. And he throws them away and they break tachat ahar shene'emar vayichar Moshe. As the Torah describes it, Moshe got upset and they fell down. Now, the imagery here is beautiful. The imagery of the words flying off the tablets is something that many different interpretations are. We're not going to get into some of the details here. I think the simplest understanding of it is that when they were first coming down, there was a spiritual koach, there was a spiritual power to these tablets. When faced with the sin of the golden calf, the spiritual aspect, this kedusha, you want to call it the holiness, you want to call it the special nature of the luchot, disappeared, and all of a sudden Moshe was faced with this physical object that he couldn't hold, and it fell down. Says the Rashbam, that's what I'm basing myself on. Says the Rashbam, that's what I was describing. I read this Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, and I'm basing my interpretation on that. Now the Rashbam gives a little bit of a different. The Rashbam's twist is not about any words flying off the page or not any words, but it's the same idea, the same kivun, the same direction, where we're suggesting that this was not deliberate. It was basically Moshe was faced with a new reality once he got to the sin of the golden calf, and as a result, Moshe had to throw it off. And he wasn't able to hold on to the tablets. Okay, so that's interpretation number one. Yes.
But which one? It has to be always said. Which one was the that Moshe felt weak, and because of that, the letters went, or because the other one that they went and then. It's a
good question. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a combination. Meaning, what caused the letters to fly off? The Medrash doesn't tell us. So if the Medrash doesn't tell us, we don't really know. The simple understanding seems to be that whether it was Moshe feeling weak and as a result the letters flew off, or the letters flew off and then Moshe, it could be a combination of them. I don't know the answer. It's interesting that the Sforno doesn't focus on the letters. He just focuses on Moshe feeling weak. The Medrash focuses more on the letters flying off. Again, I think the way I understand it is simply that when faced with the reality of what they had in front of them, things shifted, and that caused Moshe, that caused everything to get weak. What came first, I don't know. I don't know. Yes.
It's that point seems to be more with the telling of Shmos, the telling of the story.
Correct. Yes. What you're pointing out is 100%. This interpretation seems to fit much better with the way that the Torah is written in Shemos, where it doesn't seem to imply that Moshe did it deliberately. Rather, it just kind of fell. Vayashlech, 100%. And not only that, it seems to be contrary to the way that the Medrash describes things. Yashakoach Shishibarta, the Gemara agreed. Now, why would the Rashbam do that? It could very simply be that he was struggling with this exact question. How could Moshe do this on purpose? And therefore he chose something which maybe fits less into the text in Devarim and is more in line with Sefer Shemos. Because of that, I don't want to speak for the Rashbam, but it could be that when faced with that challenge of how could we understand how Moshe could do this, it could be he chose something that was a little bit less in line with Sefer Devarim and more with Sefer Shemos. Yes.
Does any of the Mepharshim go in the direction of the Sforno that Moshe was feeling weak, meaning just like Yaakov was in Yeush and couldn't handle Nevuah, so like Moshe sort of got into a bit of Yeush, like why are these people?
That's a good question. I haven't seen that. I do think that
Spiritual weakness?
Again, I do think that I think that most of us experience them sometimes together. Meaning, the Sforno describes it as says Tashash Koko, he got weak. I do believe that for many of us, sometimes a spiritual weakness or a spiritual frustration can also lead to a physical weakness. Right. And I think that's what's happening here. Meaning, I think it stemmed from a disappointment, a frustration. I don't know if it was Yeush. I don't know. Meaning, again, we know that Moshe was pretty confident. He goes back to Hashem and says, don't destroy them. But at the same time, there certainly was some kind of spiritual weakness that caused the physical weakness, which is what caused him to. So I think they were going hand in hand. That's how I understand it. Yes.
When you talk about a spiritual weakness, it seems that it would have been cataclysmic for Moshe to perceive this because he's at the high point.
Absolutely.
And that destroys everything, and it must have depleted him at an enormous way.
Correct. I mean, I think that would be natural. You're saying considering where he was, and I would even say more than that, considering where he left the people when he left. although it was 40 days ago. I mean, yeah, it's almost as if like you have the leader who's been in his own little world, old little chamber for a while, comes out and all of a sudden he sees, 100%. I could see that being a big 100%. Okay, so but that's in what's interpretation number one. Interpretation number one is that Moshe did this not of his own volition, but that reality shifted, and because of that reality shift, Moshe just simply threw it down. The Ramban takes a bit of a middle interpretation. He also suggests that Moshe did it deliberately, but not necessarily with anything specific in mind. Look at source number 8. Says the Ramban, "V'haluchot ma'aseh Elohim hema." Says the Ramban, "Hayaro'oi sheyazkir hakatuv kol ma'aseh haluchot b'pasuk vayitein el Moshe." First, the Ramban points out something we mentioned when we first went through the psukim, that when the Torah describes how this was the hand of God, it was written on both sides, and it was charut. Says the Ramban, all that doesn't belong here. It belonged earlier when HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when the Torah first describes the Luchot, and Hashem giving the Luchot to Moshe. Why does it mention it here now? Says the Ramban, "Kasher amar ktuvim be'etz b'Elohim, aval hiskiro bikan lisaper b'ma'alatan lomar ki lo nimna Moshe b'kol ze milishborotam." It's to stress that even though it was the hand of God, and even though it was written in a supernatural way, and even though, despite all of that, nevertheless Moshe still broke them. It's to contrast that reality. That's what the Ramban, and we're going to see that Tziv says the same thing as well. Why did he do this? Look at the Ramban. Ki charalo biroto hamaaseh hara'ahu. He got upset. He was angry. He faced this new reality. V'lo yachol l'hitapek. He couldn't hold himself. He couldn't hold himself back. So similar to what you had mentioned, that Moshe just got so angry that he comes from up in Har Sinai. He comes down. He sees what the people are doing. He sees not only are they serving the golden calf, but they're celebrating it. Everything that's going on. He's so frustrated that he just can't hold himself back. He just whatever he has in his hand, he takes it and he throws it down. So again, this is a middle interpretation in that it is, according to this interpretation, Moshe did do it on purpose, but it wasn't necessarily a premeditated, thought out action, which we're going to see. According to other interpretations, it was. It was something that Moshe was doing in reaction to what he was seeing.
Right.
Yes.
That's what I was about to say. He had, that would be probably the hardest thing to do forever. But he had to do it to save the possibility that we would still be here 2,000 years later. In other words,
okay, but that's already assuming that there was some logic or some thought. That's assuming something, meaning it could be. We're going to see that soon. Well, again, according to the Ramban right now, the simple understanding of the Ramban was just simply that he couldn't help himself. He was so disappointed.
That's what I just said. I said basically what he said.
Okay, we'll see. I think what you're suggesting is something more along the lines of what we're going to see in some of the other Mefarshim soon, which is that there was actual logic, that Moshe was thinking this through and saying, there's a reason to throw this down. And we'll see why that might be. But of the Ramban, it might just simply be, he wasn't thinking that he came, he was holding the Luchot, he got so upset, he just, he reacted. Yes?
The fact that Israel lost the connection with Hashem, now it's in physicality, but the Luchot being broken. So it seems like they're all very connected.
Explain what you mean.
That's the message.
Explain what you mean. That why? So why breaking the Luchot specifically? Because it's
a reflection of that Bnei Israel broke the connection.
Okay, because they broke the connection, so his act of breaking was in reaction. Okay, good. We're going to see someone who says something. Yeah, fair. Yeah, fair. Okay, very nice. Very nice. Okay, so this is what we have so far. We've seen two interpretations. One interpretation was that he did it just physically. He couldn't hold them anymore as a result of seeing what was happening. The second interpretation was that he was just so angry he couldn't help himself. It was done on purpose, but it wasn't necessarily premeditated, which again might be the Ramban trying to fit both Sefer Shemos and Sefer Devarim together to have both texts fit with each other. Premeditated by premeditated, I mean something that was maybe thought through as he was walking down the mountain. And you'll see what I mean. Meaning, the Ramban seems to just be assuming that there's reactive. So you know what? Maybe premeditated is the wrong word. I would say proactive as opposed to reactive. Meaning, he's doing it for something specific as opposed to just reacting in the way that it does. Yes.
Except for Kadosh Baruch Hu had told him what was going on.
So good. You're raising a separate question. Hashem told him what was going on. So number one, why does it bother him so much? And number two, if he's going to break the Luchot, why doesn't he break from up top? The Netziv asked that question. We're going to get to that soon. It says in Netziv, why didn't he just break it up on top? Why does he break it down below? And the Tiv says, because he wanted to show Am Yisrael something excellent. Okay, we're going to get to that. Okay, now there are a number of different midrashic interpretations that are all the way on the other end, that are of the impression, and this is really a majority of the Mefarshim, of the impression, following in what we had seen before, that this was something that Moshe did on purpose for a reason. It wasn't reactive. He had a specific reason in mind. What would that reason be? We have a whole range of Mefarshim. So look at source number 9. Source number 9, Shmos Rabbi will bring two of them. Some of them are connected to some of the ideas that some of you have mentioned. Davar acher, sheparchu haktuvim min haluchot lekach shibram. Once the words had left, therefore he broke them. Shene'emar ve'era v'hinei chatatem la'Hashem Elokeichem. Ra'a Moshe, this is the part that we want to get to. Shechatu v'shiber haluchot. Well, because Moshe saw that they had sinned, therefore, he broke the Luchot. And here, what the Medrash is going to say is he did it to protect the nation, to protect Am Yisrael. Mashal Lisar Shenatal Isha. It uses a parable of a king or of a prince who married a woman. V'katav lak tuba, or he didn't marry. He took a woman, he was going to marry her. He wrote her a ksuba. Unitana biyad hashushbin. He gave it to the servant to say, or to her servant, and said, please hold on to this for the woman. La'achar yamim, yatsa aleha shemra. After some time, a shemra, a bad name, some word got out that she had committed adultery, she had cheated on this sar. Ma asa shushbin, what did the servant do? Karat aktuba, he ripped up the ktuba. Amar mutav shetehei nidonate kipnuya velo ke'eshet ish. He ripped up the ktuba and said, now that there's no ktuba, I can claim, or she can claim, that they were never married. And if they were never married, she didn't commit adultery. It's better that she be judged as a pnuya, as a single woman, than as an eshes isha, somebody who is married. Kach asa Moshe. Moshe did the same thing. Says Moshe, these luchot are symbolic of this brit between God and HaKadosh and Bnei Yisrael. Amar lahem im ani mishaber taluchot ein li Yisrael amidah. Ein ani mishaber taluchot ein li Yisrael amidah. If I don't break these luchot, then Am Yisrael are now going to be basically brought to trial against the Kadosh Baruch for committing adultery, for serving Avodah Zarah against Hashem right after they had just had this incredible event. Shene'emar zoveach la Elohim yachram. The Torah says that if a person serves idols, you're going to be destroyed. Ma'asa, so what did he do? Shibreim. He broke the luchot. Amar lo la Kadosh Baruch Hu, lo hayu yodin ma'ya katuv behem. They didn't know what was in it. It was so much as if them coming, Moshe saying, the luchot are gone. The Bnei Yisrael didn't really understand. They didn't really know. It's not their fault. Okay, so according to this interpretation, Moshe was very deliberately breaking the luchot in order to protect Am Yisrael. That's one interpretation. Next interpretation, a similar one, where he's trying to protect Am Yisrael, but in a little bit of a different way, and it actually reminds us of something we learned a couple of weeks ago. Davar acher, va'era v'hinei chatatem la'Hashem Elokeichem. We're in source number 9, the second paragraph. Ra'a she'en li Yisrael amidah. Moshe realized that Am Yisrael is in deep trouble for what they did. V'chiber nafsho imahem. And he decided to throw his lot in with them. If they're going to get punished, I might as well get punished too. So what did he do? He broke the luchot. He said to God, if you're upset with them, be upset with me. V'shiber taluchot. V'amar la Kadosh Baruch Hu, heim chatu v'ani chatati. They sinned and I sinned. Sheshibarti taluchot, I broke it. So according to this, he broke the luchot in order to get in trouble, in order to be with Am Yisrael. V'im bochel ata lahem, afani mechol. If you're going to forgive them, forgive me. Shene'emar ve'ata'im Tisa chatatem kein lechatati mechol. V'im ein ata mechol lahem, al timcholi. And if you're not going to forgive them, don't forgive me. We're one. Says Moshe, I'm the leader. I am with my people. If you're going to forgive them, forgive me. If you're not going to forgive them, don't forgive me. It's like, that person who just kind of throws himself in with his group and says, I'm with them. Whatever happens to them, I want to be. Then that's the sign of a leader. So those are two other interpretations, according to the Midrash, where Moshe was deliberately trying to save Bnei Yisrael. There's another Midrashic interpretation, that this is hinted at, and this is also mentioned by Rashi as well, that says that no, he broke them deliberately, but it wasn't to save Am Yisrael. It was actually to show that they were guilty of something wrong. Look at source number 10, Shmos Rabbah. It was a condemnation of them. Hashlishit darash bichukat Pesach. Kisha asu Yisrael ta'egel. When Am Yisrael did the egel, source number 10, Amar uma im haPesach shehaya l'sha'a b'Mitzrayim Amar li zos chukat haPesach kol ben nechar lo yochal bo. Moshe did a kal v'chomer. He said, it says in the Torah that anyone who is not Jewish isn't allowed to bring a korban Pesach. Or anyone who serves Avodah Zarah is not allowed to do Korban Pesach. Yisrael she'avdu avodat kochavim, Am Yisrael who have just served avodah zarah, yachol hin lekabel et Torah. How could they accept the Torah? So according to this interpretation, Moshe was actually condemning Bnei Israel. He said, you don't deserve these luchot. These luchot aren't for them. It wasn't to try to save them. It was to basically show they don't deserve this. And he took the luchot and he threw them down and said, this isn't for you. Okay, so again, we see such a huge range of midrashic interpretation regarding this question because in the text itself, it's really unclear. Others suggest, and we're going to see two other interpretations, that again, it wasn't just, that the goal here wasn't to make a statement, but it was actually to educate Am Yisrael. And that's the Netziv and the Meshech Chachma. The Netziv in source number 11, as I mentioned before, one of the questions he raises is, why did Moshe not break the Luchot up at the top? If they didn't deserve it, let's say this interpretation we just read right now, he should have broken it up top. Why did he do that? Number one. Number two, he asked the question, why does the Torah stress and describe the Luchot in detail as Moshe is bringing them down? And there he says to show the power of what Moshe was about to do. That even though these were written by God and they were written in a miracle and they were on both sides, despite all of that, nevertheless, Moshe didn't hesitate to do what needed to get done in order to educate the people. If you look at source number 11, we'll read some of it inside. Hine kol hashevach hakatuv al haluchot. We're in source number 11, the first paragraph. Mikomam yoter leel. The place describing all of the luchot really belongs earlier on. Elaba, we're on the second line. Ba hakatuv livaer eich asa Moshe kol hagidolot likach et ha'egel lisarfo be'esh v'lo amad ish negdo. V'arei et Aaron hichrichu od lasot ela mishum shem Moshe. It's to show that Moshe did this. Moshe hit chakem v'lo shiber taluchot biyoto bahar. Moshe was smart. He didn't break the luchot when he was still up in the mountain. Kisha amar lo Hashem mimaseh ha'egel v'huchlat etzlo lishabrim ki v'gam hevin ki kach ritzono. Ela mishum sherotza Moshe lishaber et levav ha'am ulahasir datam birotom asher Moshe mishaber le'enehem sigula nifla'a kazu. Says the Netziv, Moshe specifically took this incredibly powerful, incredibly important thing and waited until he was right in front of the nation and broke it to wake them up, to show the gravity of what they had done. This wasn't to protect them. It wasn't to condemn them. It was basically to say, guys, look what you're just doing. Look what you're doing. And it was to basically shake them a little bit, to shake them up and say, I am taking this God-given, God-created object and breaking it because you guys need a wake-up call. You need to understand the gravity of what you have done. And the Netziv goes on to say that it's actually interesting, according to, says the Netziv, not only did Moshe not break it up at the top of the mountain, when Moshe went down all the way down the mountain and saw them doing what they were doing, he didn't break it down amongst the people. He went back up on the mountain, not at the top of the mountain, at the bottom of the mountain, but in a place where he would be the most visible and able to get the point across. So says the Netziv, Moshe's goal was to shake up the people, to help them realize what they had done, the gravity of their sin. And Dafka, you're right. It was a huge decision. And it was a grave decision that Moshe made, but it was necessary because of the sin that the people had committed. And therefore, says the Netziv, this needed to go hand in hand, and that's why he did what he did. Yes?
Can we assume that the people understood the gravity and they knew what he was carrying and how precious it was?
Okay, so there's two things. Can we assume that they knew what he was carrying? I would think so. Meaning, I thought you meant did they learn their lesson? That is, I don't know. But can we assume that I think it's safe to assume that they knew what it was.
Why?
I don't know. That's just you're right. There's nowhere in the text where the Torah says that. Certainly after the fact, they're going to understand it when the second ones are written and the second ones are broken. But you're right. I don't know. That's my initial inclination and answer to your question is I would think they would know what it was. Or at least the Netziv.
They're involved in this whole thing, and he comes down with something.
Well, they knew he was coming down. Well, again, we have to remember they had just received the Ten Commandments. They were familiar with the Aseret HaDibrot. They were familiar with the concept. Were they familiar with the fact that he was going to come down in 2 tablets and the written? I don't know. That's the part that I'm not sure about. They knew that there was something called Aseret HaDibrot. They had received them from God. Again, we're past Parshat Yisrael, so they're familiar with the Aseret HaDibrot. Whether they were familiar with how it was going to be coming down, I don't know. my own vision of it is also that, again, remember, it's also kind of building off Midrashim, was that there probably was some aura to these tablets, which will probably indicate that. But again, according to one Midrash, it flew away. So I don't know. It's my own, my own understanding of it. But it's a very, very good question. Yes.
Is it a fact that he came down, saw what was going on, and then came up a little bit, and then?
That's what the Tiv points out.
Well, that kind of negates this idea that spontaneously, that when he saw what was going on, that he broke it. It's like
okay. It's a good question. I have to look at the text again. I haven't looked at the text. Meaning, the Tiv makes that point. The Tiv makes this point that he was not at the top of the mountain. He was not amongst the people, but he specifically went back up to an area on the mountain. Whether or not that's clear in the text, I'd have to look at the text again and see that, or it could just be that it was an interpretation. My assumption is it's probably somewhat open to interpretation where exactly he was. Whether he was on his way down, whether was he at the bottom of the mountain, was he amongst the people? I don't know. And the Tiv does make that specific point.
That would be pretty significant because that would really kind of
highlight this specific point.
Well,
yes,
it would highlight whether or not it was a spontaneous act or it was a deliberate act.
Although we could argue that he went down, saw what was happening, and then went back up where he was going to give his message to the people. And at that point, it might have still been spontaneous. Again, spontaneity can take different types of forms. But I think you're making a good point that this point of the Nitziv would need to be investigated in the text itself. Yes.
I thought the reason he did it was to mitigate Midat Din.
What do you mean?
Because Hashem said He's going to wipe the people out and begin again with you, Moshe.
So
and Moshe said, "Don't do that."
So that's I think more the medrash that we were talking about. Well, that's what I think more what the medrash was talking. I don't know if that's what the Netziv is suggesting here, but that's more what the medrash said. When the medrash said, "Listen, I'm going to throw it down too. Put me in with them. I'm with them. Whatever's going to happen to them has to happen to me." I think it's a good suggestion, but I don't know if that's what the Netziv is saying. Okay. Yes, last one, and then we'll move on.
There's 2 points that you were just discussing. One is, please. There's 2 points that you were just discussing. One is, why did Moshe not react at the top of the mountain when he first told? But it's not like he didn't believe God. God told him exactly what they were going to do, and Moshe, on the other hand, he begs for forgiveness up there, and then goes down. And something triggers it, something different when he comes down. And it seems clear if you look at the Pesukim describing when Kadosh Baruch Hu first tells Moshe Rabbeinu what's happening and what Moshe first sees it. And though a lot of times the people point to the Chazal say the Ein Shmiya K'Re'iyah, but I don't think that really solves the problem. I think the difference is there's the word that is used in a lower description when he is down at the bottom, compared to when he was with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, is umcholot, that they were actually enjoying themselves, indicating that when Kadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu at the top of the mountain exactly what they did, the reason that he didn't react so terribly is he was using the following argument. He was saying, Kadosh Baruch Hu, they're like children. I was away. They didn't see their father. They didn't know what to do. They felt lost. They had to do something. And the closest thing they knew what to do was what they were taught to do in Mitzrayim, and that is to worship idols.
I think that could be. I don't know if it's. My initial reaction would be that it was more what you were saying earlier about Eno Doma Shmir L'Re'iyah, that hearing about it is no different to seeing it. But I think your point about the Mecholot is a good point. Yeah.
I would say normally say Ein Doma, but when we're talking about the Kadosh Baruch Hu,
correct, true.
The second thing is that the strange thing in one of the midrashim that you mentioned is that when he threw it down, he threw it a little away from him so he wouldn't hurt his feet.
That's his forno.
What's he caring about his feet? I mean, even if it's
that's
a natural thing to do, why did he bother mentioning it?
This forno. I think the reason why this forno is mentioning it is because he's trying to. According to this forno, it fell. He didn't actually throw it; it fell. No, but the text describes it as throwing. So this forno is trying to struggle with, on the one hand, he didn't throw it deliberately, it kind of just fell. But on the other hand, the text describes it as throwing. So I think the Sforno says that he basically just threw it a little bit to push it away from, that's his description. I think it's natural. I think it's natural to protect yourself.
You could say instead that he did that purposely, but that the feet symbolically means the very basis of Yahadus and basis of OUisrael's believing in the Kadosh Baruch Hu was at risk. Not just the luchos, not just that anything.
That's very nice, Jewish. I don't know if that's what the Rashba meant, but
and very much so. When Moshe first comes down, they don't believe in the Kadosh Baruch Hu or anything. Only because he was Keheyesh.
Yafeh. I'm sorry. We're just because of time. I want to just quick.
Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, all these different opinions keep coming back to the same thing. That when we're looking at this event, we're not looking at facts. We're looking at what the Parsha is saying. You can't discuss it as did he see it, didn't he see it, did he?
Correct.
These are messages.
Correct.
The Parsha wants to take from.
That's true. Well, that's true of I think most of the Torah. I think that's true of I think what you're raising, and it's an important point. And then we'll just move to end the shiur so you have some time before the next shiur. I think what whenever you learn Chumash, especially when you're learning stories in Chumash, you have to learn them on two levels. My father is fond of saying this all the time. Number one, there's stories that actually happened. And sometimes there are important questions as to what exactly happened. We should never use midrash to the point that we fail to remember that these were human beings. Again, they might have been human beings who achieved a certain level, but they were people. Moshe is in kind of a different level, but in general, the Torah is describing events that happened to people, and that level of the Torah should never be forgotten. So we're always asking that question of what happened. We might not conclusively answer it. We might learn 5 different interpretations of what happened, but they're all different interpretations that are important and are relevant. And at the same time, the Torah is not just a story of what happened. It's also a text that's meant to teach us lessons, to teach us morals, and teach us a way of life. And we're always going to be struggling and trying to understand the stories on both levels. And that's what we're doing here, trying to understand what actually happened and what message maybe we could learn from it. So I'm going to say briefly the suggestion of the Meshech Chochmah, and then one final point. The Meshech Chochmah suggests, and he brings numerous different proofs to this idea. He says that Moshe deliberately broke the LUCHOT to teach them a very, very important lesson. And that lesson is, there is no such thing, says Meshech Chochmah, as something which is inherently holy. Holiness and Kedusha only come from God. And by the way, he says it very, very strong, and there are those who will disagree with certain aspects. He says there's no inherent difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. There's no inherent difference between one object and another object. Any object that has Kedusha, that has holiness, that holiness only comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if a person is following the Torah and doing things in the right way, then certain parts of our physical world are imbued with holiness. If we fail to keep the Torah, then even those objects that had been written by God, created by God, may on some level lose their holiness because they're no longer able to be used in the service of God. Says the Meshech Chochmah, the people had trouble with this. The whole sin of the golden calf was because they were looking for a physical manifestation of holiness in this world. Moshe wasn't there anymore. They didn't have anything to hold on to. And that was why they did the sin of the golden calf. Moshe needed to take the LUCHOT, which were written by God and created by God, and break them. To show even this, which was written and carved out by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you're going to sin to God, and you're not going to follow His way and follow His path, then you have no hope. Then even these lose their holiness. And so there was this deliberate message that Moshe was trying to teach the people when he took those luchot and broke them, which is holiness only comes from service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when we're following HaKadosh Baruch Hu's path. If we lose our way, even those things which to us seem to have inherent Kedusha lose that holiness, and that was the message that Moshe wanted to teach by breaking the luchot. I want to just get back to 1 minute. Our final question, which was, okay, after all these different interpretations, why did they still keep the luchot, the broken luchot? Why didn't they just, get rid of it? So I think what many of you were suggesting before, and one simple understanding is because of all these messages. Because there's so many different ways that we can understand the message that Moshe was teaching. In order for them to remember each of these messages, whether it was the Meshech Chochmah about the lesson of holiness, or whether it was the Netziv, to understand the gravity of their sin, to remind them not to sin again. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, take these broken luchot, put them next to the luchot, so that you'll never forget what caused you to sin and the lessons you learned from that. However, I want to share with you another interpretation, another answer. The answer by Rav Tzadok Milublin. Rav Tzadok Milublin suggests a beautiful idea. He says this wasn't meant to remind them to prevent them from sinning again. It was to remind the people that you should not run away from your mistakes. You should not run away from your mistakes. When we have a past of something that we've done or we're ashamed of, very often our initial inclination is run away, hide it. It doesn't exist. Says Moshe to HaKadosh, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Moshe, take these broken luchot, which symbolize the greatest sin that you've ever done, and put them right next to the luchot. Because sometimes it's the journey towards those whole luchot that enable, you have to go through the broken luchot to eventually receive the full luchot. There's a famous saying in the name of the Kutzker Rebbe that there's nothing as whole as a broken heart. That sometimes when a person is broken, when a person is in crisis, when a person goes through a challenging time, whether it's a sin that they commit or whatever it is, that ultimately brings them back. Now, why do I think this is so important? Why am I pushing to stick this in right before we finish? We as a nation are broken. And although right now, and although our brokenness is not necessarily coming from a specific sin or mistakes that we've made, it is important to understand that when a person is going through a process of brokenness, sometimes that brokenness, although we wish it never happened, and we would never wish that it continue, we wish that it doesn't continue and it ends. Nevertheless, it's important to realize that moments of brokenness, moments of pain, sometimes are opportunities to create something greater. And I want to just read this with you because I think it's very beautiful. This was a quote that a short article that Sivan Rav Meir had written. It was in the Torah Tidbits. Shout out to OU. I think it was last week. Okay, and it fits in exactly with this theme about creating things from broken pieces. Sharon Negri, mother of Neria Negri, who fell in battle on Simchat Torah, sent me the two pictures below and wrote as follows. Several days ago, this is source 13, I attended a mosaic workshop. In order to create a mosaic, it is necessary to shatter whole tiles into pieces with a hammer. I came to the workshop in a highly emotional state and released all of my pain in breaking the tiles. And then, while shattering the tiles and afterwards in gluing the pieces together, I felt how deeply significant and healing it was to have found a workshop like this following the loss of my Neria. My reality was shattered, and I am gathering up the pieces. But I am not just gathering them up, I am making a new creation out of them. I really and truly believe that this is what is demanded from me. It's a divine demand and also a demand from myself. To take a broken heart, my broken reality, and create life. A new and different life, but life. If they would show us a woman breaking tiles with a hammer and tell us that she is creating something, we would raise an eyebrow. After all, she is destroying, not creating. But without seeing the continuation of the story, how she glues the broken pieces back together, we would only see destruction. I truly believe, this is Sivan Rav Meir talking, that this is what all of us are going through together at this time. The shattering has been so great that we might think that everything has been destroyed. But we must create something new with God's help out of the broken pieces. Our story will continue. I'll end with the following thing. So, Rav Tzadok points out, and this isn't the time that we're in right now, but he points out that the name of the month Elul is Rashi Tevot for good, and also for Elul. It's also for Aron Luchot V'Shvurei Luchot. That inside the Aron Kodesh there always was the complete Luchot as well as the broken tablets. Because when a person is able to grow from his sins or from tragedy that befalls him and create something greater, that is what we're ultimately looking to do in our lives.